Side 2. Amu finished her schooling the year that her father retired from his job in Delhi and moved to Imanam. Since her father did not have enough money to raise a suitable dowry, no proposals came Amu's way. Her 18th birthday came and went. Amu grew desperate. She dreamed of escaping from Imanam and the clutches of her ill-tempered father and bitter mother. Eventually, Papachi agreed to let her spend the summer with a distant aunt who lived in Calcutta. There, Amu met her future husband. He was on vacation from his job in Assam, where he worked as an assistant manager of a tea estate. He was a small man, but well-built, pleasant-looking. He proposed to Amu 5 days after they first met. Amu didn't pretend to be in love with him. She just thought that anything, anyone at all, would be better than returning to Imanam. She wrote to her parents, informing them of her decision. They didn't reply. Amu had an elaborate Calcutta wedding. Looking back on the day, Amu realized that the slightly feverish glitter in her bridegroom's eyes had not been love, or even excitement at the prospect of carnal bliss, but 8 large pegs of whiskey. Straight, neat. When Amu and her husband moved to Assam, Amu, beautiful, young and cheeky, became the toast of the Planters Club. She wore backless blouses and smoked long cigarettes in a silver cigarette holder. Her husband turned out to be a full-blown alcoholic, with all of an alcoholic's deviousness and tragic charm. Amu was 8 months pregnant when war broke out with China. It was October of 1962. In November, amidst rumors of Chinese occupation, Esther and Rachel were born by candlelight in a hospital with the windows blacked out. Amu counted 4 eyes, 4 ears, 2 mouths, 2 noses, 20 fingers, and 20 perfect toenails. She didn't notice the single Siamese soul. Their father, stretched out in the hospital corridor, was drunk. By the time the twins were 2 years old, their father's drinking had driven him into an alcoholic stupor. Eventually, his English manager summoned him for a serious chat. Amu was surprised when her husband returned looking despondent, but not devastated. Mr. Holick had proposed that Baba go away to a clinic for treatment. And for the period of time that he was away, Mr. Holick suggested that Amu be sent to his bungalow to be looked after. Amu said nothing. Her husband grew infuriated by her silence. He lunged at her, grabbed her hair, punched her, and then passed out from the effort. Amu took down the heaviest book she could find, the Reader's Digest World Atlas, and hit him as hard as she could, on his head, his legs, his back and shoulders. When he regained consciousness, he was puzzled by his bruises. He apologized abjectly for the violence, but immediately began to badger her about helping with his transfer. When his bouts of violence began to include the children, Amu left her husband and returned, unwelcomed, to her parents in Imanam, to everything that she had fled from only a few years ago, except that now she had 2 young children and no more dreams. Papachi would not believe her story because he didn't believe that an Englishman, any Englishman, would covet another man's wife. Amu loved her children, but their wide-eyed vulnerability and their willingness to love people who didn't love them exasperated her and sometimes made her want to hurt them, just as an education, a protection. Amu watched over them fiercely. She was quick to reprimand her children, but even quicker to take offense on their behalf. For herself, she knew that there would be no more chances. There was only Imenham now, a front veranda and a back veranda, a hot river and a pickle factory. And in the background, the constant high whining mule of local disapproval. Occasionally, when Amu listened to songs that she loved on the radio, something stirred inside her. A liquid ache spread under her skin, and she walked out of the world like a witch to a better, happier place. On days like this, there was something restless and untamed about her. Even her walk changed from a safe mother walk to another, wilder sort of walk. She wore flowers in her hair and carried magic secrets in her eyes. She spoke to no one. She spent hours on the riverbank with her little plastic transistor shaped like a tangerine. She smoked cigarettes and had midnight swims. What was it that gave Amu this unsafe edge, this air of unpredictability? It was what she had battling inside her, an unmixable mix, the infinite tenderness of motherhood and the reckless rage of a suicide bomber. On the days that the radio played Amu's songs, everyone was a little wary of her. They sensed somehow that a woman that they had already damned now had little left to lose and could therefore be dangerous. So, on the days that the radio played Amu's songs, everybody agreed that it was best to just let her be. On other days, she had deep dimples when she smiled. She had a delicate, chiseled face, black eyebrows angled like a soaring seagull's wings, a small straight nose, and luminous nut-brown skin. Sometimes she was the most beautiful woman that Esther and Rachel had ever seen. And sometimes she wasn't. On the back seat of the Plymouth, between Esther and Rachel, sat baby Kochama. In the way that the unfortunate sometimes dislike the co-unfortunate, baby Kochama disliked the twins, for she considered them doomed, fatherless waifs. Worse still, they were half Hindu hybrids, whom no self-respecting Syrian Christian would ever marry. Baby Kochama resented Amu because she saw her quarrelling with a fate that she, baby Kochama, felt she had graciously accepted, the fate of the wretched, manless woman. She subscribed wholeheartedly to the commonly held view that a married daughter had no position in her parents' home. As for a divorced daughter, she had no position anywhere at all. And as for a divorced daughter from a love marriage, well, words could not describe baby Kochama's outrage. As for a divorced daughter from an inter-community love marriage, baby Kochama chose to remain quiveringly silent on the subject. The twins were too young to understand all this, so baby Kochama grudged them their moments of happiness. Most of all, she grudged them the comfort they drew from each other. On the Plymouth roof rack, there was a four-sided, tin-lined plywood billboard that said, on all four sides, in elaborate writing, "Paradise, Pickles and Preserves." Below the writing, there were painted bottles of mixed fruit jam and hot lime pickle in edible oil. Amu said that the billboard made them look ridiculous, like a travelling circus, with tail fins. Mama Chi had started making pickles commercially soon after Papa Chi retired and came to live in Imenham. The Kottayam Bible Society was having a fair and asked Mama Chi to make some of her famous banana jam and tender mango pickle. It sold quickly, and Mama Chi found that she had more orders than she could cope with. Soon she found herself busy all year round. Papa Chi, for his part, was 17 years older than Mama Chi, and realized with a shock that he was an old man when his wife was still in her prime. Though Mama Chi had conical corneas and was already practically blind, Papa Chi would not help her with the pickle making. He had always been a jealous man, so he greatly resented the attention his wife was suddenly getting. Every night he beat her with a brass flower vase. The beatings weren't new. What was new was the frequency with which they took place. Then Charco came home for a summer vacation from Oxford. He was in those days strong from rowing for Balliol. A week after he arrived, he found Papa Chi beating Mama Chi. Charco caught Papa Chi's vase hand and twisted it around his back. "I never want this to happen again," he told his father. "Ever." Papa Chi never touched Mama Chi again. But he never spoke to her either, as long as he lived. He bought the sky blue Plymouth from an old Englishman in Munar. He wouldn't allow Mama Chi or anyone else in the family to use it, or even to sit in it. The Plymouth was Papa Chi's revenge. Papa Chi had been an imperial entomologist at the Pusa Institute. His life's greatest setback was not having had the moth that he had discovered named after him. It fell into his drink one evening while he was sitting in the veranda of a rest house. As he picked it out, he noticed its unusually dense dorsal tufts. To Papa Chi's intense disappointment, he was told that his moth had been identified as a slightly unusual race of a well-known species of the tropical family Lymantriidae. The real blow came 12 years later, when, as a consequence of a radical taxonomic reshuffle, lepidopterists decided that Papa Chi's moth was, in fact, a separate species. By then, Papa Chi had retired. It was too late for him to assert his claim to the discovery. His moth was named after the acting director of the Department of Entomology, a junior officer whom Papa Chi had always disliked. In the years to come, Papa Chi's moth's pernicious ghost haunted every house that he ever lived in. It tormented him and his children and his children's children. Until the day he died, even in the stifling Imanum heat, every single day, Papa Chi wore a well-pressed three-piece suit and his gold pocket watch. On his dressing table, he kept a picture of himself as a young man, taken in a photographer's studio in Vienna, where he had done the 6-month diploma course that had qualified him to apply for the post of imperial entomologist. It was during those months in Vienna that Mama Chi took her first lessons on the violin. The lessons were abruptly discontinued when Mama Chi's teacher made the mistake of telling Papa Chi that his wife was exceptionally talented, potentially concert class. When he died, Papa Chi left trunks full of expensive suits and a chocolate tin full of cufflinks that Charco distributed among the taxi drivers in Kottayam. They were separated and made into rings and pendants for unmarried daughters' dowries. When the twins asked what cufflinks were for, "To link cuffs together," Amu told them. They were thrilled by this morsel of logic in what had so far seemed an illogical language. Cuff plus link equals cufflink. Cufflinks gave them an inordinate satisfaction and a real affection for the English language. Amu said that Papa Chi was an incurable British CCP, which was short for Chichi Poach, and in Hindi meant shit wiper. Charco said that the correct word for people like Papa Chi was Anglophile. He made Rahel and Esther look up Anglophile in the Reader's Digest Great Encyclopedic Dictionary. It said, person well disposed to the English. Then Esther and Rachel had to look up disposed. It said, 1. Place suitably in particular order. 2. Bring mind into certain state. 3. Do what one will with. Get off one's hands. Stow away. Demolish. Finish. Settle. Consume. Food. Kill. Sell. Charco said that in Papachi's case, it meant number 2, bring mind into certain state. Papachi's mind had been brought into a state which made him like the English. Charco told the twins that though he hated to admit it, they were a family of Anglophiles, pointed in the wrong direction, trapped outside their own history, and unable to retrace their steps because their footprints had been swept away. He explained to them that history was like an old house at night, with all the lamps lit and ancestors whispering inside. To understand history, Charco said, we have to go inside and listen to what they're saying, and look at the books and the pictures on the wall, and smell the smells. Esther and Rachel had no doubt that the house Charco meant was the house on the other side of the river where they had never been. Kari Saipu's house, the Black Saib, the Englishman who had gone native, who spoke Malayalam and wore mundus, who had shot himself through the head 10 years ago when his lover's parents had taken the boy away from him. After the suicide, the property had lain empty for years. Very few people had seen it, but the twins could picture it. The history house, with cool stone floors and dim walls and billowing ship-shaped shadows. Plump, translucent lizards lived behind old pictures, and waxy, crumbling ancestors with tough toenails and breath that smelled of yellow maps gossiped in sibilant, papery whispers. But we can't go in, Charco explained, because we've been locked out, and when we look in through the windows, all we see are shadows, and when we listen, we cannot understand the whispering because our minds have been invaded by a war that we have won and lost, the very worst sort of war, a war that captures dreams and redreams them, a war that has made us adore our conquerors and despise ourselves. Marry our conquerors is more like it, Amu said dryly, referring to Margaret Kochama. Charco ignored her. Then, to give Esther and Rachel a sense of historical perspective, he told them about the Earth Woman. He made them imagine that the Earth, 4,600 million years old, was a 46-year-old woman. It had taken the whole of the Earth Woman's life for the Earth to become what it was, for the oceans to part, for the mountains to rise. The Earth Woman was 11 years old, Charco said, when the first single-celled organisms appeared. The first animals, creatures like worms and jellyfish, appeared only when she was 40. She was over 45, just 8 months ago, when dinosaurs roamed the Earth. The whole of human civilization as we know it, Charco told the twins, began only 2 hours ago in the Earth Woman's life. It was an awe-inspiring and humbling thought, Charco said, that the whole of contemporary history was no more than a blink of the Earth Woman's eye. And we, my dears, everything we are and ever will be, are just a twinkle in her eye, Charco said grandly. Though the Earth Woman made a lasting impression on the twins, it was the history house, so much closer at hand, that really fascinated them. They thought about it often, the house on the other side of the river, looming in the heart of darkness. A house they couldn't enter full of whispers they couldn't understand. They didn't know then that soon they would go in, that they would cross the river and be where they weren't supposed to be, with a man they weren't supposed to love. While other children of their age learned other things, Esther and Rachel learned how history negotiates its terms and collects its dues from those who break its laws. They heard its sickening thud, they smelled its smell, and never forgot it. History's smell, like old roses on a breeze. They would grow up grappling with ways of living with what happened. They would try to tell themselves that worse things had happened, that worse things kept happening. But they would find no comfort in the thought. It was only after Papachi died that Charco resigned his job as lecturer at the Madras Christian College and came to Imanum with his Balliol ore and his pickle baron dreams. His ore, with his teammates' names inscribed in gold, hung from iron hoops on the factory wall. Up to the time Charco arrived, the factory had been a small but profitable enterprise. Mamachi just ran it like a large kitchen. Charco had it registered as a partnership and informed Mamachi that she was the sleeping partner. He invested in equipment and expanded the labor force. Almost immediately the financial slide began, but was artificially buoyed by extravagant bank loans that Charco raised by mortgaging the family's rice fields around the Imanum house. Though Amu did as much work in the factory as Charco, legally, Amu, as a daughter, had no claim to the property. Until Charco arrived in Imanum, Mamachi's factory had no name. Everybody just referred to her pickles and jams as Sosha's tender mango or Sosha's banana jam. Sosha was Mamachi's first name, Soshama. It was Charco who christened the factory Paradise Pickles and Preserves and had labels designed and printed at Comrade K.N.M. Pilar's press. It was Charco's idea to have a billboard painted and installed on the Plymouth's roof rack. On the way to Cochin now, it rattled and made falling off noises. Near Vaikum, they had to stop to buy some rope to secure it more firmly. Rachel began to worry about being late for the sound of music. Then, as they approached the outskirts of Cochin, the red and white arm of the railway level crossing gate went down. Rachel knew that this had happened because she had been hoping that it wouldn't. She hadn't learned to control her hopes yet. Esther said that that was a bad sign. So now they were going to miss the beginning of the picture, when Julie Andrews starts off as a speck on the hill and gets bigger and bigger till she bursts onto the screen with her voice like cold water and her breath like peppermint. The red sign on the red and white arm said, "Stop," in white. "Pots," Rachel said. A yellow hoarding said, "Be Indian, buy Indian," in red. "Naid ni yeb," Esther said. The twins were precocious with their reading. More buses and cars had stopped on either side of the level crossing. The buses all had girls' names: Lucy Kati, Molly Kati, Bina Mol. In Malayalam, Mol is little girl and Mon is little boy. Bina Mol was full of pilgrims who'd had their heads shaved at Tirupati. When the man that manned the crossing came out of his booth and signalled with his limp, flapping walk to the tea stall that they were in for a long wait, drivers switched off their engines and milled about, stretching their legs. With a desultory nod of his bald head, the level crossing divinity conjured up beggars with bandages, men with trays selling pieces of fresh coconut, and cold drinks, Coca-Cola, Fanta, rose milk. A leper with soiled bandages begged at the car window. "That looks like mercurochrome to me," Amu said of his inordinately bright blood. "Congratulations," Charco said, "spoken like a true bourgeoise." Amu smiled and they shook hands, as though she was being awarded a certificate of merit for being an honest-to-goodness, genuine bourgeoise. Moments like these the twins treasured and threaded like precious beads on a somewhat scanty necklace. Inside the Plymouth, it wasn't easy for Rachel to see Esther because baby Kochama rose between them like a hill. Amu had insisted that they sit separately to prevent them from fighting. On Esther's side of the road, Muralidharan, the level-crossing lunatic, perched cross-legged and perfectly balanced on the milestone. His balls and penis dangled down, pointing towards the sign, which said Cochin. Esther noticed that the hair on his head was curly grey. The hair in his windy, armless armpits was wispy black, and the hair in his crotch was black and springy. One man with 3 kinds of hair. Esther wondered how that could be. He tried to think of whom to ask. The waiting filled Rachel until she was ready to burst. She looked at her toy watch. It had the time painted on it. 10 to 2. One of her ambitions was to own a watch on which she could change the time when she wanted to. She thought of Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer kissing each other sideways so that their noses didn't collide. She wondered whether people always kissed each other sideways. She tried to think of whom to ask. Then a hum approached the held-up traffic and covered it like a cloak. The drivers got back into their vehicles and slammed doors. The beggars and vendors disappeared. Within minutes, there was no one on the road. Except Muralidharan, perched with his bum on the burning milestone. There was hustle-bustle and police whistles. From behind the line of waiting traffic, a column of men appeared with red flags and banners and a hum that grew and grew. "Put up your windows," Charco said, "and stay calm. They're not going to hurt us." "Why not join them, comrade?" Amu said to Charco. "I'll drive." A muscle tensed below the wad of fat on Charco's jaw. He tossed away his cigarette and rolled up his window. Charco was a self-proclaimed Marxist. He would call pretty women who worked in the factory to his room, and on the pretext of lecturing them on labour rights, flirt with them outrageously. As the marchers approached, Amu put up her window, Esther his, Rachel hers. Suddenly the sky-blue Plymouth looked absurdly opulent on the pitted road. "Look down," baby Kochama said. "Avoid eye contact. That's what really provokes them." On the side of her neck, her pulse was pounding. Within minutes, the road was swamped by thousands of marching people. The air was red with flags which dipped and lifted as the marchers ducked under the level crossing gate and swept across the railway tracks in a red wave. "Long live the revolution!" they shouted. "Workers of the world, unite!" Even Charco had no really complete explanation for why the Communist Party was so much more successful in Kerala than it had been almost anywhere else in India, except perhaps in Bengal. One theory was that it had to do with the large population of Christians in the state. 20% of Kerala's population were Syrian Christians, who believed that they were descendants of the 100 Brahmins whom St. Thomas the Apostle converted to Christianity when he travelled east after the resurrection. Structurally, this somewhat rudimentary argument went, Marxism was a simple substitute for Christianity. Replace God with Marx, Satan with the bourgeoisie, heaven with a classless society, the church with the party, and the form and purpose of the journey remained similar. An obstacle race with a prize at the end, whereas the Hindu mind had to make more complex adjustments. The trouble with this theory was that in Kerala, the Syrian Christians were, by and large, the wealthy, estate-owning, pickle factory-running, feudal lords for whom communism represented a fate worse than death. A second theory claimed that it had to do with the comparatively high level of literacy in the state. Perhaps, except that the high literacy level was largely because of the communist movement. The real secret was that communism crept into Kerala insidiously as a reformist movement that never overtly questioned the traditional values of a caste-ridden, extremely traditional community. The Marxists worked from within the communal divides. They offered a cocktail revolution, a heady mix of Eastern Marxism and Orthodox Hinduism spiked with a shot of democracy. Charco had been converted early and had remained through all its travails a committed supporter. The march that sky-blue December day had been organised by the Travancore Cochin Marxist Labour Union. Their comrades in Trivandrum would march to the Secretariat and present the Charter of People's Demands that paddy workers, who were made to work in the fields for 11.5 hours a day, be permitted to take a 1-hour lunch break. That women's wages be increased from 1 rupee 25 paisa a day to 3 rupees, and men's from 2 rupees 50 paisa to 4 rupees 50 paisa a day. They were also demanding that untouchables no longer be addressed by their caste names. They demanded not to be addressed as Achu Parayan, or Kerlan Paravan, or Kutan Pulayan, but just as Achu, or Kerlan, or Kutan. The marchers that day were party workers, students, and the labourers themselves, touchables and untouchables. On their shoulders they carried a keg of ancient anger. Inside the Plymouth, it was still and hot. Baby Kochama's fear lay rolled up on the car floor like a damp, clammy cheroot. This was just the beginning of it, the fear that over the years would grow to consume her. Hers, too, was an ancient, age-old fear, the fear of being dispossessed. A balled fist banged down on the burning sky-blue bonnet. It sprang open. Another balled fist slammed down on it, and the bonnet closed. Charco rolled down his window and called out to the man who had done it. "Thanks, quieto," he said. "Valare, thanks." "Don't be so ingratiating, comrade," Amu said. "He didn't really mean to help. How could he possibly know that in this old car there beats a truly Marxist heart?" "Amu," Charco said, his voice deliberately casual, "is it at all possible for you to prevent your washed-up cynicism from completely colouring everything?" Silence filled the car like a saturated sponge. Washed up, cut like a knife through a soft thing. This was the trouble with families. Like invidious doctors, they knew just where it hurt. Just then Rachel saw Velita, Velja Parpenson, Velita, her most beloved friend, Velita. Velita marching with a red flag, in a white shirt and mundu with angry veins in his neck. Rachel rolled down her window in a flash. "Velita! Velita!" she called. He froze. What he heard was a familiar voice in a most unfamiliar circumstance. "Velita! Everyday! Velita!" He stepped sideways and disappeared deftly into the angriness around him. Inside the car, Amu whirled around. She slapped at Rachel's calves, which were the only part of her left in the car to slap. Calves and brown feet in barter sandals. "Behave yourself," Amu said. Baby Kochama pulled Rachel down, and she landed on the seat with a surprised thump. "It was Velita," Rachel explained with a smile, "and he had a flag." "You're a stupid, silly little girl," Amu said. A sudden fierce anger pinned Rachel against the car seat. "But it was him." "Shut up," Amu said. Rachel saw that Amu had a film of perspiration on her forehead and upper lip, and that her eyes had become hard like marbles, like Papa Cheese in the Vienna studio photograph. How Papa Cheese moth whispered in his children's veins. It was Velita. That much Rachel was sure of. She'd have known him anywhere, anytime, and if he hadn't been wearing a shirt, she would have recognized him from behind. She knew his back. She'd been carried on it more times than she could count. It had a light brown birthmark, shaped like a pointed dry leaf. He said it was a lucky leaf that made the monsoons come on time. A brown leaf on a black back. An autumn leaf at night. A lucky leaf that wasn't lucky enough. Velita wasn't supposed to be a carpenter. He was called Velita, which means white in Malayalam, because he was so black. His father was a paravan, a toddy tapper. He had a glass eye. He had been shaping a block of granite when a chip flew into his left eye and sliced right through it. As a young boy, Velita would come with Velja Papan to the back entrance of the Imanam house to deliver coconuts. Papachi would not allow our paravans into the house. Nobody would. They were not allowed to touch anything that touchables touched. Mamachi told Esther and Rachel that she could remember a time when paravans were expected to crawl backwards with a broom, sweeping away their footprints so that Brahmins or Syrian Christians would not defile themselves by accidentally stepping into a paravan's footprint. In Mamachi's time, paravans, like other untouchables, were not allowed to walk on public roads, not allowed to cover their upper bodies, not allowed to carry umbrellas. They had to put their hands over their mouths when they spoke, to divert their polluted breath away from those whom they addressed. When the British came to Malabar, a number of paravans, Palayas and Pulayas, among them Velita's grandfather, converted to Christianity to escape the scourge of untouchability. As added incentive, they were given a little food and money. They were known as the Rice Christians. They had jumped from the frying pan into the fire. They were made to have separate churches with separate services and separate priests. After independence, they found they were not entitled to any government benefits because, officially on paper, they were Christians and therefore casteless. It was a little like having to sweep away your footprints without a broom. Or worse, not being allowed to leave footprints at all. It was Mamachi on vacation from Delhi who first noticed Velita's remarkable facility with his hands. Velita was 11 then, 3 years younger than Amu. He could make intricate toys, tiny windmills, rattles, minute jewel boxes out of dried palm reeds. He would bring them for Amu, holding them out on his palm so she wouldn't have to touch him to take them. Mamachi persuaded Velja Papan to send him to the untouchable school that her father-in-law, Punyan Kunya, had founded. Velita was 14 when Johann Klein, a carpenter from a carpenters' guild in Bavaria, spent 3 years with the Christian Mission Society, conducting a workshop with local carpenters. Every afternoon after school, Velita worked with Klein till dusk. By the time he was 16, Velita was an accomplished carpenter. He had his own set of carpentry tools and a distinctly German design sensibility. He built Mamachi a Bauhaus dining table with 12 dining chairs in rosewood, and a traditional Bavarian chaise longue. Apart from his carpentry skills, Velita had a way with machines. He mended radios, clocks, water pumps. When Mamachi decided to enclose the back veranda, it was Velita who designed and built the sliding folding door that became all the rage in Imenham. It was Velita who maintained the new canning machine and the automatic pineapple slicer. Velita who oiled the water pump and the small diesel generator. Velita's father, Velja Papen, however, was an old-world paravan, and his gratitude to Mamachi and her family for all that they had done for him was as wide and deep as a river in spate. When he had his accident, Mamachi organized and paid for his glass eye. Velja Papen feared for his younger son. He couldn't say what it was that frightened him. It was nothing that he had said or done. Perhaps it was the way he held his head, the quiet way he offered suggestions without being asked, or the quiet way in which he disregarded suggestions without appearing to rebel. Velja Papen tried to caution Velita, but Velita misunderstood his muddled concern. To him, it appeared as though his father grudged him his skills. Velja Papen's good intentions degenerated into nagging and bickering, and one day Velita disappeared. For 4 years, nobody knew where he was. There was no way of reaching him when his mother died of tuberculosis. Then Kutapen, his older brother, damaged his spine. He was paralyzed and unable to work. Velita heard of the accident a whole year after it happened. It had been 5 months since he returned to Imenham. He never talked about where he had been or what he had done. Mamachi rehired Velita and put him in charge of general maintenance. It caused a great deal of resentment among the other touchable factory workers. Mamachi paid Velita less than she would a touchable carpenter, but more than she would a paravan. When he returned to Imenham, Velita still had about him the same quickness, the sureness, and Velja Papen feared for him now more than ever. But this time he said nothing. Not until he saw, night after night, a little boat being rowed across the river. Not until he saw it return at dawn. Not until he saw what his untouchable son had touched. More than touched. Entered. Loved. When the terror took hold of him, Velja Papen went to Mamachi. He trembled his own body like a man with malaria. Mamachi ordered him to stop it, but he couldn't, because you can't order fear around, not even a paraven's. Velja Papen told Mamachi what he had seen. He offered to kill his son with his own bare hands, to destroy what he had created. In the next room, baby Kochama heard the noise and came to find out what it was all about. She saw grief and trouble ahead, and in her heart of hearts she exulted. Estapen and Rachel were too young to remember Velita when he left. But in the months since he had returned, they had grown to be the best of friends. They were forbidden from visiting his house, but they did. They would sit with him for hours. They loved the way wood in Velita's hands seemed to soften and become as pliable as plasticine. His house smelled of fresh wood shavings and the sun, of red fish curry cooked with black tamarind, the best fish curry, according to Esther, in the whole world. It was Velita who made Rachel her luckiest ever fishing rod and taught her and Esther to fish. And on that sky-blue December day, it was him that she saw, marching with a red flag at the level crossing outside Cochin. Filth had laid siege to the Imenham house, like a medieval army advancing on an enemy castle. It clotted every crevice and clung to the window panes. Baby Kochama had stopped noticing long ago. Kochu Maria, who noticed everything, had stopped caring. Esteban appeared at the kitchen door, wet and wiser than he really was. Behind him the long grass sparkled. Baby Cochamar looked up from the television. "Here he comes," she announced to Rachel, not bothering to lower her voice. "Now watch. He won't say anything. He'll walk straight to his room. He'll walk straight to his room and wash his clothes. He's very over-clean. He won't say a word." Rivulets of water ran down Esther's face and neck. He walked to his room. Rachel followed Esther to his room. Amu's room. Once. The obsessive cleanliness of the room was the only positive sign of volition from Esther. Silence hung in the air like secret loss. Esther put on the tap and water drummed into a plastic bucket. He undressed in the gleaming bathroom. He pulled his crushed strawberry t-shirt over his head. Smooth, slim, muscular arms crossed over his body. Rachel watched his stomach suck inwards and his ribcage rise as his wet t-shirt peeled away from his skin, leaving it wet and honey-colored. Had he seen her? Was he really mad? Did he know that she was there? They had never been shy of each other's bodies, but they had never been old enough together to know what shyness was. Now they were old enough. Old. A viable, diable age. Rachel at the bathroom door, slim-hipped, a lizard on a map on her faded t-shirt. Long, wild hair with a glint of deep henna red sent unruly fingers down into the small of her back. The diamond in her nostril flashed, sometimes, and sometimes not. A thin, gold, serpent-headed bangle glowed like a circle of orange light around her wrist. Her mother's melted wedding ring. At first glance she appeared to have grown into the skin of her mother. Less lovely, perhaps, to those who liked roundness and softness in women. Only her eyes were incontestably more beautiful. Large, luminous, drownable in, as Larry McCaslin had said and discovered to his cost. Rachel searched her brother's nakedness for signs of herself, in the shape of his knees, the slope of his shoulders, the sculpted hollows on either side of his taut, beautiful buns. He was a naked stranger met in a chance encounter. He was the one that she had known before life began, the one who had once led her swimming through their lovely mother's cunt. Both things unbearable in their polarity, in their irreconcilable far apartness. A raindrop glistened on the end of Esther's earlobe, thick, silver in the light, like a heavy bead of mercury. She reached out, touched it, took it away. Esther didn't look at her. He retreated into further stillness, as though his body had the power to snatch its senses inwards away from the surface of his skin into some deeper, more inaccessible recess. The silence gathered its skirts and slid like Spider-Woman up the slippery bathroom wall. Esther put his wet clothes in a bucket and began to wash them with crumbling, bright blue soap. Abhilash Talkies advertised itself as the first cinema hall in Kerala with a 70mm cinemascope screen. To drive home the point, its facade had been designed as a cement replica of a curved cinemascope screen. The toilets were called his and hers. Hers for Amu, Rachel and baby Cochamar. His for Esther alone, because Charco had gone to see about the bookings at the hotel. "Will you be okay?" Amu said, worried. Esther nodded. In hers, Amu suggested that Rachel balance in the air to piss. She said that public pots were dirty, like money was. You never knew who'd touched it. Lepers, butchers, car mechanics, pus, blood, grease. Rachel was too short to balance in the air above the pot, so Amu and baby Kochama held her up, her legs hooked over their arms, her feet pigeon-toed in barter sandals. For a moment nothing happened. "Come on," Amu said. "Sssss." Rachel giggled. Amu giggled. Baby Kochama giggled. When the trickle started, they adjusted her aerial position. Rachel was unembarrassed. She finished, and Amu had the toilet paper. "Shall you or shall I?" baby Kochama said to Amu. "Either way," Amu said. "Go ahead, you." Rachel held her handbag. Baby Kochama lifted her sari. Rachel studied her baby grandaunt's enormous legs. Years later, during a history lesson being read out in school, the Emperor Babur had a wheatish complexion and pillar-like thighs. This scene would flash before her. Baby Kochama balanced like a big bird over a public pot. Blue veins like lumpy knitting running up her translucent shins. Fat knees dimpled. Poor little tiny feet to carry such a load. When the gurgling, bubbling sound came, baby Kochama listened with her eyes. A yellow brook burbled through a mountain pass. Rachel liked all this, holding the handbag, everyone pissing in front of everyone, like friends. She knew nothing then of how precious a feeling this was. Like friends. They would never be together like this again. Amu, baby Kochama, and she. Outside, Esther alone waited. Amu felt a sudden clutch of love for her reserved, dignified little son in his beige and pointy shoes who had just completed his first adult assignment. She ran loving fingers through his hair. She spoiled his puff. The man with the steel ever-ready torch said that the picture had started, so to hurry. They had to rush up the red steps with the old red carpet. Amu held Esther's hand. Baby Kochama, heaving up the steps, held Rachel's. Rachel was like an excited mosquito on a leash, flying, weightless. They arrived at the Princess Circle lobby. They walked past the refreshment counter where the orange drinks were waiting, and the lemon drinks. The orange, too orange, the lemon, too lemon, the chocolates, too melty. The fan-whirring, peanut-crunching darkness smelled of breathing people and hair oil, and old carpets. A magical, sound of music smell that Rachel remembered and treasured. She breathed deep and bottled it up for posterity. They squeezed past irritated people who moved their legs this way and that to make space. Baby Kochama held Rachel's seat down while she climbed on. She wasn't heavy enough, so the chair folded her into itself like sandwich stuffing, and she watched from between her knees. Esther, with more dignity, sat on the edge of his chair. The camera soared up in the sky-blue Austrian sky with the clear, sad sound of church bells. Far below on the ground, quiet nuns clustered quietly around their Reverend Mother. They had complaints to make, sweet singing complaints, about Julie Andrews, who was up in the hills singing, "The hills are alive with the sound of music," and was late for Mass. There was a voice from outside the picture. It was clear and true, cutting through the fan-whirring, peanut-crunching darkness. There was a nun in the audience, heads twisted around like bottle caps. Shh! Esther was singing. A nun with a puff, an Elvis pelvis nun. He couldn't help it. Get him out of here, the audience said. Esther, for heaven's sake, shut up, Amu's fierce whisper said. Amu, can I go and sing it outside? Esther said, before Amu smacked him. I'll come back after the song. End of side 2.